Hi, everyone, and welcome back to GRUFFtalk. I'm Barbara Hannah Grufferman, your host. And today we're going to be talking about insulin resistance, what it is, how you can prevent it, what some of the symptoms are, how you can treat it, and to shed some light on everything insulin resistance is Dr. Margaret Nachtigall. She's a frequent guest on GRUFFtalk and also a reproductive endocrinologist at NYU Langone Health and an expert on women's health and menopause. So welcome back to GRUFFtalk, Dr. Margaret.
Thank you. Hello, Barbara. Great to be here today.
So let's take it from the very, very top. What is insulin?
Absolutely. So insulin is essential in your body. Insulin is what allows you to take what you eat, any type of sugar, and turn it into usable energy. So what happens when you eat is that signal the pancreas to release insulin, and the insulin has to bind to what's called, and that allows for a cascade of events to occur, which allows something called GLUT4 to come up, grab the surface, grab that sugar, and turn it into usable energy. So insulin is really important for us to be able to have our energy.
Exactly. So now let's get to the big question. What is insulin resistance?
Right. So everyone has a slightly different sensitivity to their own insulin. Insulin resistance means that you are less sensitive to your own insulin than the average. So what does that really mean? Well, when that insulin binds to its receptor, if you can imagine, it's like a ball going into a socket. If the shape of that receptor is square instead of a circle, then it's not going to connect as well. And so if you could imagine that different people have different shapes of their receptors or different sensitivities of how the receptor sees the insulin, and that can affect how you work. So your pancreas will change the amount of insulin necessary based on how much of that insulin is bound to the receptor. So if you're less sensitive to insulin, you're going to require more insulin to get the same job done. And that job is taking your sugar and turn it into energy. So people that are insulin resistant have higher insulin levels.
And is this more prevalent in women who have gone through menopause or are going through menopause? Is this an age-related condition?
Yes. It just so happens that estrogen is a insulin sensitizer. So without estrogen, if your body is gone through menopause and you don't have any estrogen supplements, you are going to relatively be more insulin resistant than you were when you had when you had estrogen circulating.
Okay, so, yes, meaning when you said supplements, meaning if you're on hormone therapy. For example.
Exactly.
So, insulin resistance is something, which is why I wanted to do this episode, is something that people really don't understand. I mean, I think they've been hearing a lot more about it because of Ozempic and weight loss. It's just a term that's being bandied about a bit more. Right. So I know that people have been clamoring to find out more about it. But they do know, I think, the term metabolic syndrome more. But yes, let's talk about that for a minute.
Okay.
What is metabolic syndrome and what is the connection to insulin resistance?
Okay. So insulin resistance can lead to metabolic syndrome. And many people, almost all people with metabolic syndrome, have insulin resistance. Metabolic syndrome, it's really a collection. It's a cluster of conditions that happen together that increase your risk of heart disease and increase your risk of diabetes. So what are those conditions? It is a combination of that increased weight in the middle combined with an increase in blood pressure, an increase in blood sugar, high triglyceride levels, which is one of the components in the cholesterol ring, and actually combined with a low HDL, which is always coined the good kind of cholesterol. So it's that increased weight in the middle, high blood pressure, high blood sugar, high triglycerides, and low HDL. And usually we think if you have three of the above, you're considered to have metabolic syndrome.
Got it. And as we know, this all of these that you just described,
Right.
are really very common in women.
Yes.
In their
Yes.
50s and beyond. We know that. But of course, we also know that there are things that we can do, which we will get to.
Sure.
But what are the most common health issues that can happen? If someone, I think you mentioned some of them just now when you were describing metabolic syndrome, but what are some of the most common symptoms if you have insulin resistance? What are they?
Well, insulin resistance, because you have insulin resistance, you're going to have higher insulin levels. And higher insulin levels have been tied, not necessarily causative, but we certainly know associated and possibly causative of an increase in cancer risk, definitely an increase in diabetes, type 2 diabetes risk, an increase in weight gain, particularly in the middle, an increase in cardiovascular disease, an increase in polycystic ovarian syndrome in younger people, an increase in dementia. Most recently, we're noting that people that have high insulin may be also tied to an increase in dementia, definitely an increase in inflammation. So all of these factors can be from a high insulin. So preferentially, a lower insulin or a stable insulin is healthier than having chronically elevated insulin levels.
So how do you know if you even have insulin resistance? How do you know this is even happening in your body?
So one is a clue is if you have signs of metabolic syndrome, high blood pressure, increased waist in the middle. This is a clue. If you notice that your waist is increasing disproportionately to the rest of your body, thin arms, thin legs, but only the middle is increasing, that's a clue. Things on physical exam, if there's a darkening at the neck and it looks like you have a ring or it looks like you have a dark necklace, but actually it's your skin. And it's also darkening in the what we call antecubital, in the opposite of your elbow. If it's dark there, or darkening under your arms,
meaning like the crease in your arm,
the crease
when you
in
bend
your arm.
it?
Yes,
wow.
yes. If it's particularly darkened, or under your arm, if you under your arms get particularly dark, that can often be a sign of insulin resistance. Not always, but the neck darkening as well, and especially if it's a velvety dark increase, that can be a sign. And sometimes an increase in tiny little skin tags that you get particularly under the arm, around the neck, can also be a sign of insulin resistance. Now, that's on physical exam. There are some blood tests that you can get. We like to look at a fasting insulin level, which would be elevated, and a fasting glucose level, as well as a hemoglobin A1C. That is a measure. Hemoglobin A1C is a measure of what your sugars have done over the last 3 months. So if that level is elevated, that's also a hint that there probably is some insulin resistance happening. So those are some major tests. There also are some stimulation tests that you can do. You can get a glucose or insulin tolerance test, where you go in fasting, you drink this sometimes terrible tasting sugary drink, and then you measure your sugar and insulin levels every half an hour, then an hour, then 2 hours, and even 3 hours. And you can watch what your insulin does over those 3 hours. So that can be really helpful. So that's the way that you can diagnose whether or not you have insulin resistance.
But again, you did mention that if you have some of these other factors, it's probably likely that you either have it or are heading in that direction.
Right.
So let's talk about how you can prevent it or even treat it. Prevention. Let's start with that.
Right.
I think I can predict what some of your answers will be, but let's go for it.
Right. Well, exercise is critical.
Right.
And exercise is so helpful, because exercise alone can help those same factors, GLUT4, that you need to take sugar and turn it into energy, can really facilitate that ability. And so if you're exercising, any amount of exercise is going to be helpful. But exercise, particularly if you're doing a fast walk and you notice that you are a little out of breath, or it's a little hard to carry on a conversation, that is ideal. But you do want to be able to carry on a conversation. You don't want to be constantly out of breath, but that can be really helpful if you do that every single day. That can really help keep your sugars, even that can be helpful. Also, diet is being careful to have an appropriate, healthy diet. In order to decrease insulin resistance, one that has high protein and low carbohydrate has been found to be particularly helpful. So that is something that may be able to be preventative as well, or at least if it's there to prevent the continuation of insulin resistance. So I think diet, exercise, getting sleep, and managing your stress, that can be helpful as well. Limiting your alcohol intake, really limiting the simple sugars, trying to avoid those. If you are going to have carbohydrates, have complex carbohydrates, have more fiber. And
I think
of course,
the big question is it reversible?
It is reversible.
Okay.
It is reversible, and this is definitely something that we can work on. Certainly helpful, and you know that I always say that reach out to a healthcare professional and get help. Diet and exercise, you want to make sure that you are under the care of somebody that is helping you to do all of these factors, and it never hurts to rule out any other underlying issue that may be participating in causing the insulin resistance. Then there may be other factors that are involved. And I'm sure we can talk about some medication in terms of treatment as well.
Yeah, of course. I mean, if some of these lifestyle changes aren't really helping to get rid of the insulin resistance in your body, what are the medications that can help?
So there are some over-the-counter products which can be helpful, but I always, I'm saying this with quite a caution because I really want people to get the help of their particular healthcare professional. But there are some over-the-counter insulin sensitizers which have been shown to be beneficial. Inositol is one of those. And then for medications, only under it's prescription and under the care of a healthcare provider would be Metformin, which is an insulin sensitizer. There are some newer agents which work with the sodium channels and affect sugars that have been used. And now the newer GLP-1 receptor agonist, which has gotten a lot of attention, can be extremely helpful in
You mean like
reversing
Ozempic? And Wegovy.
Ozempic, Wegovy, Mounjaro, and I'm sure we're going to have some more coming out. Rybelsus. These are all different agents. So basically, semaglutide is what we're talking about, which is an agent, and then there are others that are helpful in reversing insulin resistance. In other words, they are great insulin sensitizers.
Right. This is the reason why insulin resistance, that term, has been really talked about so much more in the last year or so because of these new medications like Ozempic and Wegovy, talking about weight loss and other ways that it can impact your body's health, like lowering your insulin resistance, for example. But so many people, as I said at the start, really don't understand what that really means, what it really is. So this has been really, really important.
I mean, I think it's important. Yes, it's good to understand why these medications work. I mean, we've talked about these medications on other occasions. They work at multiple levels. They work at the brain level to decrease appetite. They slow the emptying of the stomach into the intestines, so you feel full longer, as well as being an unbelievably effective insulin sensitizer. So they work for that reason. And therefore, they can be beneficial for so many other conditions, and they can help so many other conditions. Because if we think about insulin resistance is increasing the likelihood of developing heart disease, diabetes, dementia, in
some
someone
cancers,
that's still,
as you said.
Cancers, inflammation, in people that are still getting periods, polycystic ovaries. I mean, this has always been a chicken and an egg. Do people with polycystic ovaries develop insulin resistance, or is it the insulin resistance that causes polycystic ovaries? But it's an important component of polycystic ovaries, which is, another condition which we're not going to talk about right now. But all of these factors are so important. And, being able to avoid insulin resistance can be very helpful. And insulin itself, it's really the more insulin that's circulating around, usually the higher testosterone is present. And the higher the testosterone, sometimes the higher the insulin. And increased testosterone can have effect by decreasing hair on the head. So hair loss can occur, hair on your body. So this is something that people can notice. And when the insulin resistance is reversed and insulin levels go down, it actually improves those symptoms. So this is something that can be very helpful.
Yeah, creating more balance in the body. You mentioned metformin before, and I'm really intrigued by metformin, have been following it for a number of years, especially because many longevity experts believe metformin is a way to extend your health span as well as your lifespan.
Right.
So I do keep a sharp eye on new research that comes out about that. And it's interesting to me that it's also used very often, actually, right, to help lower insulin resistance, especially if lifestyle changes aren't really doing the trick. Do you think that Ozempic and Wegovy and the others that are still coming out, coming down the pike, do you think that they would replace metformin, or is metformin different enough and has different impact on the body that there's a place for both categories of medicines?
I'm curious that they're going to be a replacement. I think that they are different, that metformin has some anti-inflammatory properties, just as you were describing. It has been reported that it may have some anti-cancer effects, anti-inflammatory effects, and it certainly has some insulin resistant prevention or reversal, insulin sensitizing. And that's what it is. It's an insulin sensitizer. So I do not think that one will replace the other. I think they both work really well, and they're different options for different people.
And we also know that right now, metformin is a lot cheaper than
definitely less
some of the other ones,
expensive, and it's by mouth. Yes, absolutely.
So, this has been really incredible. But what are and we covered so much, but what are your 3 biggest takeaways you want to make sure that the GRUFFtalk audience remembers from this conversation about insulin resistance today?
Well, I think one is that, seek attention. If you notice that you do have, say, frontal balding, your midline is extending, but your arms and legs are still thin, go see somebody and get some attention. Maybe it's insulin resistance. Maybe it's something else that more serious that needs to get attention. But it's a physical characteristic that you should investigate. And then also, what can you do? I think I say this a lot, but, having a healthy diet that's rich in protein and low in carbohydrates, that you're getting plenty of exercise, that you're trying to get sleep, trying to maintain your stress levels, and that it can be reversible if insulin resistance does occur, and it pays to try to reverse insulin resistance so that you don't develop cardiovascular disease, dementia, cancer, or other factors. So I think if we can live our healthiest lives, that's,
that really is
ideal.
The best course, of
and
course,
don't be
across
afraid
the board.
to get attention. Don't be afraid to seek medical care.
Right. You're a big believer and proponent of finding a team if you need it, or one doctor if that's all you require at this time in your life, who is a trusted partner in your health and who will guide you and work with you on, being, living your best life, as you just put it. And also, I always like to really point out to people that we're not talking about having to, exercise for 2 hours a day, although that would be great. It's not necessary. It's not, you can do what I've talked about a lot, something like they call exercise snacks, where you could just do small bouts of exercise throughout the day. Like after you and I are done with this recording, Dr. Margaret, maybe you and I will each go off and do 10 push-ups or walk up and down staircase for a while.
In my office, right.
In your office.
Any little bit is helpful, and too much may be too much, So a balance is really great. So what, and also just make sure it's right for you. Someone with a bad hip, maybe they have a different kind of exercise, etc. That's why having a medical professional to guide is also, I think, really helpful.
Right. But the whole point of this is just to make sure people understood what insulin resistance is and what some of the signs are, the symptoms, so that they can pay attention and either, make those lifestyle changes or go and see a trusted healthcare provider to kind of suss everything out and figure out what's going on, so you can take the proper path.
Yeah.
Okay.
Great.
Always a pleasure to see you.
So good to see you. Great to see you.
We will have more to talk about very soon. So looking forward to the next